My dream home became a nightmare the moment my neighbor claimed she owned it, then called 911 to report me for trespassing. The smell of fresh paint and old wood was my new favorite perfume. For 3 weeks, it was the first thing I smelled when I woke up, and the last thing I smelled before I drifted off, dreaming of color swatches and landscaping ideas. This house was everything. 2 stories, a slightly crooked porch, and a backyard full of rogue rose bushes that had been left to their own devices for years. It wasn't a palace, but it was the culmination of a decade of scrimping, saving, and working freelance design jobs until my eyes burned. It was mine. I'd spent the first week just sitting on the floor of different rooms, my golden retriever, Buster, snoring softly beside me, just soaking it all in. I'd traced the patterns of the sunbeams as they moved across the dusty hardwood floors. I pictured a big, comfy sofa right there, a bookshelf filled to bursting over there. In the kitchen, I imagined hosting my first Thanksgiving, the air thick with the scent of turkey and pumpkin pie. This wasn't just a property. It was the blueprint for the rest of my life. The purchase had been a whirlwind of paperwork. I swear I signed my name so many times my hand went numb. My realtor, a perpetually cheerful woman named Sarah, had guided me through the mountain of inspections, appraisals, and legal documents. The sellers were an elderly couple moving to Florida, and the transaction was clean, straightforward. On closing day, they handed me a ridiculously ornate brass key, wished me well, and that was that. I was a homeowner. The deed was filed, the mortgage was in my name, and a stack of papers thick enough to stop a bullet sat in my fireproof safe, proving it. My first interaction with her was on moving day. She was an older woman from the house next door, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a floral apron that looked like it had never seen a drop of grease. She was watering her prize-winning petunias when the moving truck rumbled up the street. She watched us for a while, her expression unreadable, before finally wandering over. "Quite the commotion," she said, her voice thin but sharp. "You must be the new tenant." I paused, a heavy box labeled "Kitchen Fragile" in my arms, and gave her a tired but friendly smile. "Oh no, I'm the new owner, just moved in. I'm Alex, by the way." I offered a hand, but she just stared at it, a flicker of something confusion, annoyance, crossing her face. "Owner? No, that can't be right. I own this house. I'm Carol." She said it with such finality, as if announcing she was the Queen of England. I laughed, thinking it was a strange neighborhood joke. "Right. Well, Carol, the papers I signed say otherwise. Pleasure to meet you." I hefted the box and headed inside, chalking it up to her being a bit eccentric. Maybe she was a long-time resident and was just being territorial. I didn't think much of it. Over the next 2 weeks, the weirdness continued. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes on my doorstep. "The lawn is looking rather unkempt. Renters are expected to maintain the property." Or, "That music was quite loud last night. Please be more considerate of the property owner." Each time I'd throw the note away, a little more irritated than the last. I tried to speak to her once, catching her as she was getting her mail. "Carol," I started as pleasantly as I could manage, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I bought this house. I'm not renting it from you." She just gave me a tight, condescending smile. "Oh dear, it seems you're very confused. The rental agreement is quite clear. Perhaps you should reread it." And then she turned and walked back to her house. Before I could say another word, I was starting to worry. Was this early onset dementia? Was she just a lonely old woman trying to feel important? I didn't want to be a bad neighbor, so I tried to ignore it. I focused on my house. I painted the living room a deep, calming blue. I ripped out the stained, ancient carpet on the stairs, revealing beautiful oak treads underneath. I was turning this house into my home, piece by piece. The real confrontation happened yesterday. I was on a ladder in the entryway, carefully cutting in the paint around the door frame, when there was a furious pounding on the door. It wasn't a knock. It was a series of rhythmic, angry thuds. Buster started barking his head off from the kitchen. I climbed down, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I opened the door to find Carol standing there, her face a mask of cold fury. She was clutching a piece of paper in her hand. "We need to talk," she hissed. "Carol, it's not a good time. I'm in the middle of painting." "It's never a good time for you, is it?" she snapped, pushing past me into the entryway. "My entryway. I am here to collect the rent. You are now 3 weeks overdue. According to this lease," she shook the paper in my face, "I am entitled to charge you a late fee and begin eviction proceedings." I stared at her, then at the paper. It was a generic fill-in-the-blanks lease agreement. In the blank for tenant, my name was crudely written. The signature at the bottom was a laughable, childish scribble that looked nothing like my own. "This is insane," I said, my voice rising. "This is a forgery. This is my house. I have a mortgage. I have the deed." Her face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. Her whole body seemed to tremble with rage. Her voice, when it came out, was no longer thin and sharp. It was a guttural scream that echoed in the small space. "Lies, all of it! This house is mine. I've owned it for 20 years. You think you can just show up with your fake papers and your lies and steal my property from me? You are a squatter, a thief." I was stunned into silence for a moment. The sheer venom in her voice was shocking. I finally found my own. "Get out," I said, my voice low and shaking. "Get out of my house, now." "Your house?" she shrieked, her eyes wild. "I will do no such thing. I'm calling the police. I'm having you thrown out on the street where you belong." I took a step forward, my hand pointing firmly at the open door. "Get out!" She backed away, but her face was twisted into a triumphant sneer. She pulled a cell phone from her apron pocket with a shaking hand. "You'll regret this. You'll see." I slammed the door in her face, my entire body vibrating with adrenaline and disbelief. I leaned against it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear her on the other side, her voice still at a hysterical pitch, but now directed into her phone. "Yes, hello, 911. I need to report a break-in. There's a man in my house. He's taken it over and he's refusing to leave. He's threatening me. Please, you have to send someone right away. My address is 112 Oak Street. Please hurry, I'm so scared." My blood ran cold. 112 Oak Street, my address. She was calling the police. On me. I scrambled to my office, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the combination on my safe. I pulled out the thick folder of closing documents, the deed, the mortgage agreement, my proof. Through the window, in the fading afternoon light, I could hear a sound that made my stomach drop to the floor. It was faint at first, but growing louder with every passing second. It was the sound of sirens, and they were coming this way. The wail of the sirens grew into a deafening shriek before cutting off abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Heavy car doors slammed shut outside. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I clutched the thick folder of documents to my chest like a shield, my knuckles white. Buster was whining nervously at my feet, sensing the tension that had saturated the air in my home. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, stomped up my porch steps. I took a deep, shaky breath and walked to the door. I had the truth on my side. That had to be enough. A thunderous knock rattled the old wood. "Police, open the door!" I twisted the knob and pulled the door inward, trying to project an aura of calm I was nowhere near feeling. 2 officers stood on my porch, hands resting warily on their service belts. One was older, with a weathered face and tired, skeptical eyes. The other was younger, jaw set, looking ready for anything. Before I could even speak, Carol, who had been lurking near the edge of the porch, let out a theatrical sob and rushed forward. "Officers, thank God you're here," she cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. "That's him. That's the man. He broke into my house and he won't leave. He even threatened me." She hid her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with manufactured grief. It was a masterful performance. The younger officer, Davis, immediately softened his expression, turning to her with concern. The older one, Miller, kept his eyes locked on me. "Sir, can you please step outside?" "No, I will not," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "This is my house. This woman is my neighbor, and for some reason she's under the delusion that she owns my property." I held up the folder. "I have the deed, the mortgage, all the closing paperwork right here. I bought this house legally 3 weeks ago from the previous owners." Officer Miller's gaze flickered to the folder, a hint of interest in his eyes, but Carol wasn't about to let the facts get in the way of her drama. She lunged forward and grabbed the old brass key from her apron pocket, the one the sellers had given me a duplicate of. "He's a liar! He's a con artist!" she wailed, dangling the key in front of the officers. "This is my key. I've lived here for 20 years. My husband, God rest his soul, he built that fireplace mantel with his own 2 hands. And now this criminal comes in and starts painting over everything, destroying our memories." She gestured wildly at the freshly painted blue walls of my living room, as if I'd committed an act of sacrilege. The younger officer, Davis, looked from her tear-streaked face to my painted walls and then back to me, his expression hardening with suspicion. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the house. Now." "This is insane," I protested, my voice rising in frustration. "Look at my documents. It's all here in black and white. My name is Alex Peterson. The deed is registered with the county under my name." I tried to hand the folder to Officer Miller, but Officer Davis stepped between us. "We're not going to sort out a civil dispute on the front porch, sir. Right now, we have a distressed resident who says you are trespassing." "She's not the resident. I am," I practically yelled, the injustice of it all making my blood boil. "Alex, was it?" Officer Miller said, his voice calm and low, a stark contrast to the chaos. "Look, son, we got a call about a break-in and a threat. For everyone's safety, we just need to de-escalate the situation. Why don't you come outside? We'll take a look at your papers, and we'll figure this out." It felt like a trap. But what choice did I have? Arguing with 2 cops on my own porch was a losing battle. Defeated, I stepped out into the humid evening air. The second I crossed the threshold, Carol shot me a look of pure, venomous triumph from behind the shield of Officer Davis's arm. I handed the entire folder to Officer Miller. He started flipping through it, his expression unreadable under the dim porch light. He saw the title deed, the mortgage agreement with my bank, the settlement statement. It was irrefutable. "This all looks pretty official," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. But Carol was ready. "Of course it does. He's a professional. People like him are experts at forging documents to trick the elderly. He's been harassing me for weeks, trying to scare me out of my own home." It was a brilliant, wicked move. She was framing me as a predator, preying on a vulnerable old widow. It was an accusation so vile it left me speechless. Officer Davis looked at me with open disgust. "Okay, that's enough," Officer Miller said, closing the folder. He looked at me, then at Carol, then back at me. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. I could feel my entire future hanging in the balance of his next words. "Look," he finally sighed, handing the folder back to me. "This is a civil matter. It's a property dispute, and that needs to be settled in court, not on the street. We can't prove who owns what right here and now." "So you're just going to leave?" I asked, incredulous. "You're just going to let her keep harassing me?" "For tonight," Officer Davis cut in, his tone firm. "Someone needs to leave the property until this can be sorted out legally." I waited for him to turn to Carol, to ask her to go back to her own house next door. But he didn't. He was looking straight at me. "What?" I breathed, the single word catching in my throat. "You can't be serious. You're kicking me out of my own house?" "She was here first. She made the call, and she claims to be a long-term resident. You just showed up," Davis said, shrugging as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "We need to maintain the peace. You can stay at a hotel for the night. Go to the courthouse in the morning and file for an emergency order. For now, you need to leave. I was being evicted from my own home by the police, based on the lies of a lunatic. As the two officers began to escort me down my own porch steps and towards the sidewalk, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a tailored suit, probably in his late 40s, got out of the driver's side. He had the same sharp features as Carol, but where her eyes were filled with frantic rage, his were cold, calculated, and sharp as glass. He strode purposefully up the walkway. "Mom? What's going on? I got your text." He put a protective arm around Carol, who immediately started sobbing again. He glared at me, his eyes sweeping over me in a dismissive, condescending wave. Then he looked at the police officers. "Thank you for coming, officers. My mother has a heart condition. This man's harassment has been putting her under extreme stress." He turned his icy gaze back to me. He took a small step forward, lowering his voice so only I could hear it over his mother's weeping. His words were precise, deliberate, and laced with a terrifying promise. "I'm Richard, Carol's son. I'm also her lawyer. You picked the wrong family to mess with. By the time I'm done with you, you won't even be able to afford the cardboard box you'll be sleeping in." The words hit me like a physical blow, sucking the air from my lungs. A lawyer. Of course, she had a lawyer for a son, a cold, menacing one who looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his expensive Italian shoe. The entire situation spiraled from bizarre to terrifying in the space of a heartbeat. Officer Davis seemed to puff up with renewed purpose, now seeing this not as a crazy old lady's rant, but as a legitimate legal threat against a fragile woman. "All right, that's it. Sir, you need to leave the premises immediately," Davis commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. He took a step towards me, his hand once again drifting towards his belt. "This is my home," I insisted, my voice cracking with desperation. "Look at the paperwork. It's all there. The sale was recorded by the county 3 weeks ago. You can look it up." "And you can present all of that to a judge," Richard said smoothly, his arm still wrapped around his whimpering mother. "In the meantime, you are trespassing on my mother's property and causing her severe emotional distress. I suggest you listen to the officer before this escalates into a criminal matter for you." He was a shark, and I was bleeding in the water. Every word he said was a calculated move, painting me as the aggressor, the criminal. He was using the law as a weapon against me, and the police were his willing accomplices. Officer Miller looked uneasy, glancing from my folder of legitimate documents to Carol's Oscar-worthy performance, but he was outranked in authority and conviction by his younger partner. He just sighed and shook his head, a silent signal of my defeat. There was nothing I could do. Arguing further would only get me arrested. With a burning knot of rage and helplessness in my stomach, I turned and walked away from my house. My house. The 2-story dream I'd poured my life savings and my soul into. I walked past the freshly weeded flower bed, past the porch swing I'd just bought and hadn't even assembled yet. Buster was barking frantically inside, scratching at the door, and the sound was like a knife in my gut. "What about my dog?" I asked, my voice hollow. Richard didn't miss a beat. "We'll call animal control to pick him up in the morning if he's abandoned. Consider it a courtesy." The threat was clear. My dog was now a hostage. The sheer calculated cruelty of it all was breathtaking. I felt dizzy, disoriented, like the entire world had tilted on its axis. I walked to my car, parked on the street, and slumped into the driver's seat. The police car stayed put, its lights off now, a silent sentinel ensuring the squatter didn't return. Through my windshield, I watched as Richard led his mother, now miraculously recovered from her fit of sobs, up the steps and into my house. He paused at the door, looked directly at my car, and then closed the door with a chilling finality. The porch light, the one I had left on, was switched off, plunging the house into darkness. My darkness. I spent that night in a grimy motel off the highway that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the water-stained ceiling, my mind replaying the scene over and over. The rage was a physical thing, a hot coil in my chest. How could this happen? How could the system fail so spectacularly? I had done everything right. I had the deed, the mortgage, the title insurance. I had legal proof of ownership that was as solid as the foundation of the house itself. And yet, I was the one sleeping in a lumpy bed while a delusional old woman and her sociopathic son were sleeping in mine. The next morning, I was at the county courthouse before the doors even opened. I looked like a wreck. I hadn't shaved, my clothes were rumpled, and my eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot. I probably looked exactly like the villain they thought I was. I filed for an emergency restraining order against Carol and an emergency eviction to have her removed. I slapped my entire folder of documents down on the clerk's counter: the deed, the mortgage papers, the proof of wire transfer for the down payment, the statement from the title company. The clerk, a weary-looking woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked it all over with a practiced eye. "Everything seems to be in order," she said, stamping a few pages. "The judge will review the emergency petition this afternoon. You can check the docket online later today to see if it's been granted." A small sliver of hope cut through the fog of my anger. This was America. Property rights were sacred. A judge would look at this mountain of evidence, see the clear, indisputable truth, and this nightmare would be over by dinner time. I spent the rest of the day in a daze at a coffee shop, nursing a single coffee for hours and refreshing the court docket on my phone every 30 seconds. My realtor, Sarah, was horrified when I called her. She started making frantic calls to the title company and the seller's agent, promising to get affidavits and whatever else I needed. My lawyer, the one who handled the closing, was equally baffled and promised to start drafting a more formal complaint. Finally, at 3:47 p.m., the docket updated. I clicked on my case number, my heart pounding. My eyes scanned the legalese until I found the ruling. Petition for emergency order denied. Denied. I read it again and then a third time, sure that I was mistaken. How could it be denied? The evidence was absolute. I scrolled down, looking for a reason, an explanation, and then I saw it. A responding motion filed that very morning. Motion to dismiss, filed by Richard C. Lawrence, ESQ, on behalf of Plaintiff Carol Lawrence. Attached to the motion was a scanned document that made my blood run cold. It was a deed, a quitclaim deed to be precise. It appeared to transfer the property at 112 Oak Street from the elderly couple I'd bought it from, not to me, but to Carol Lawrence. And the most chilling part? It was dated 2 full days before my own closing date. It looked official, complete with notarized signatures that, at a glance, looked just like the ones on my paperwork. It was a forgery. It had to be, but it was a damn good one. And it was enough to turn a clear-cut case of trespassing into a muddy, convoluted title dispute. The judge hadn't denied my claim outright. He'd simply refused to rule on an emergency basis, kicking it down the road to a formal hearing that could be weeks or even months away. Richard had outmaneuvered me. He knew he didn't have to win in the long run, he just had to create enough doubt to paralyze the system. He'd created a legal fiction, a paper shield for his mother's delusion, and the law, in its blind adherence to procedure, had accepted it. He had successfully, legally, stolen my house from under me, at least for the foreseeable future. I stumbled out of the coffee shop, the world swimming before my eyes. I was homeless. My dog was a hostage, and my life savings were tied up in a house I couldn't even set foot in. I got in my car and drove, aimlessly at first before my subconscious took over and I found myself back on Oak Street. I parked a block away, watching my house like a ghost haunting its own grave. The lights were on. There was a strange car in the driveway, Richard's black sedan. As I sat there, stewing in my own impotent fury, a moving truck, the kind used for small, local moves, pulled up in front of Carol's house next door. 2 men got out and started carrying furniture out of her house and into mine. They were moving her in. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. This wasn't just a temporary delusion anymore. This was a planned occupation. Then I saw something that made me go cold. Richard came out of my house, directing the movers. He was holding a cordless drill. He walked over to my front door, the beautiful oak door I had planned to sand and re-stain, and with a sickening, high-pitched whine, he began to drill out the lock. The sound of the drill was a violation. It wasn't just metal grinding against metal. It was an assault on my life, my dream, my future. I watched, frozen in a state of horrified disbelief, as he methodically destroyed the lock, my lock, the one whose ornate brass key I still had in my pocket. Once it was drilled out, he popped the old hardware off with a crowbar and with sickening efficiency installed a new deadbolt. My house was no longer my house. It was now his fortress. A primal rage, hotter and purer than anything I had ever felt, surged through me. All the confusion, the fear, the helplessness, it all burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard fury. He was not going to get away with this. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of property anymore. I was fighting for my life, for the simple, fundamental truth that what is yours is yours. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of caffeine and frantic research. I lived in the public library, my laptop a permanent fixture on one of the tables in the back. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a detective, and my own life was the case I had to solve. Richard had presented a forged quitclaim deed. My job was to prove it was a forgery. The first step was the sellers. I called my realtor, Sarah, who managed to track down a number for the elderly couple, the Hendersons, at their new retirement community in Florida. I expected it to be a difficult conversation, but the moment I explained who I was and what was happening, Mrs. Henderson let out a gasp. "Oh, that woman," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Carol, she was always strange, always peering over the fence. The week before we closed, she came over with some papers, said they were for the Homeowners Association, something about tree trimming regulations. My Arthur, his eyesight isn't what it used to be, and I was busy packing. We just signed where she pointed. We never thought—" Her voice trailed off, but I had what I needed. They had been tricked. Carol had presented them with a disguised legal document, the quitclaim deed, and they had signed it, thinking it was something completely innocuous. It was fraud, blatant, premeditated fraud. The next piece of the puzzle was the notary. The forged deed had a notary stamp and a signature. I looked up the notary public's name and commission number in the state database. The name was legitimate, Brenda Gable. But when I cross-referenced her commission number, I found something interesting. Her commission had expired 6 months ago. She hadn't renewed it. The notarization on Carol's deed was invalid, but it got better. A little more digging. A quick social media search revealed that Brenda Gable was Carol Lawrence's sister. It was a conspiracy, a cheap, sordid little family plot to steal a house. Richard hadn't just created a legal fiction, he'd coached his mother and aunt on how to commit multiple felonies to achieve it. He wasn't just a shark, he was a crook with a law degree. I took everything I found, a recorded phone call with Mrs. Henderson, with her permission, of course, a screenshot of the expired notary commission, proof of the family relationship between Carol and the notary, and sent it all to my lawyer. He was ecstatic. This wasn't a civil dispute anymore. This was a criminal case. He immediately filed a motion for an emergency hearing on the grounds of fraud, attaching all the new evidence. He also made a call to the district attorney's office. The hearing was set for Friday morning, less than a week after I'd been thrown out of my own home. I walked into that courtroom feeling like a different person. The fear was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. Richard was there, looking smug and confident in his expensive suit. Carol sitting beside him, looking like a frail, innocent victim. They hadn't seen the evidence yet. They had no idea the tidal wave that was about to hit them. My lawyer, Mr. Davies, laid it all out for the judge. He played the recording of Mrs. Henderson. He presented the evidence of the fraudulent notarization. He systematically dismantled Richard's flimsy case piece by piece, exposing the lies and deceit for everyone to see. I watched Richard's face as the evidence mounted. The smug confidence slowly drained away, replaced by a flicker of panic, then a mask of cold, controlled fury. Carol just seemed to shrink in her seat, her face growing paler and paler. When it was his turn to speak, Richard tried to bluster his way through. He called the evidence circumstantial. He accused me of fabricating the phone call, of hacking government websites. He was throwing legal spaghetti at the wall, hoping something would stick. But the judge, a stern-faced woman with zero tolerance for nonsense, wasn't buying it. "Mr. Lawrence," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "are you seriously suggesting to this court that the defendant conspired with the sellers, the State Notary Commission, and social media platforms to fabricate a case against your mother, a woman who, by your own admission, believes she owns a house she legally sold decades ago?" Richard stammered, for the first time looking completely out of his depth. He had no answer. He had been so sure of his own cleverness that he never imagined I would fight back this hard, this effectively. The judge's ruling was swift and brutal. She immediately voided the fraudulent quitclaim deed. She granted my eviction order and issued a temporary restraining order against both Carol and Richard, barring them from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. And then she delivered the final blow. "Furthermore," she announced, looking sternly at Richard, "based on the evidence of felony fraud, forgery, and filing a false document with the court, I am referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. And, Mr. Lawrence, I'll be filing a formal complaint with the State Bar myself. Bailiff, please escort Ms. Lawrence from the property. Mr. Peterson, you may have your keys back." The victory was so absolute, so total, that it barely felt real. A deputy walked over to a stunned Carol and gently but firmly asked for the key to my house. She handed it over, her hand trembling, her eyes wide with shock. The deputy then walked over and handed it to me. It was a new, generic-looking key, nothing like the ornate brass one I cherished, but it felt like the key to the entire world. I walked out of the courthouse and drove straight to my house. Richard's black sedan was gone. A police car was parked out front, the same one from the other night, but this time they were there for me. Officer Miller, the older cop, got out as I approached. He had the decency to look ashamed. "Mr. Peterson," he said, tipping his hat, "we're here to ensure a peaceful transfer. Ms. Lawrence has been instructed to vacate." I walked up my own front steps, my heart a triumphant drum. The new key slid into the new lock. I turned it, heard the satisfying click of the tumblers, and pushed the door open. And the smell hit me. It wasn't the smell of fresh paint and old wood anymore. It was the smell of stale perfume, mothballs, and something else, something foul and cloying. The living room walls, the ones I had so carefully painted a calming blue, were now covered in dozens upon dozens of framed, faded photographs. Pictures of Carol, of a man I assumed was her late husband, and of a younger, smirking Richard. They had hung their memories all over my walls, and sitting right in the middle of my living room floor, looking lost and terrified, was my dog, Buster. He let out a joyful bark and bounded towards me. I knelt and hugged him tight, burying my face in his fur. We were home. The nightmare was over. I spent the rest of the day taking down their pictures, piling the frames in the corner like trophies of a war I had won. I opened every window, trying to air out the suffocating smell of their brief, toxic occupation. As evening fell, I was sitting on the floor, Buster's head in my lap, finally feeling the sweet, quiet relief of victory. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. My blood went cold when I read the words. "You think you've won? You took my mother's home and had her thrown out on the street. This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started." The text message hung in the air like a poisonous vapor, tainting my victory. For a moment, the familiar knot of fear tightened in my stomach. Richard wasn't just a lawyer. He was a cornered animal, stripped of his dignity and facing the destruction of his career. That made him unpredictable and dangerous. I took a deep breath, the clean, crisp evening air slowly pushing out the phantom smell of Carol's perfume. I looked down at Buster, who was looking up at me with trusting brown eyes. I looked around at my blue walls, my dusty floors, my house, my home. He had taken it from me once. I would not let his threats drive me out again. I didn't reply to the message. Instead, I saved a screenshot and forwarded it to my lawyer, Mr. Davies, with a simple note. Thought you and the DA should see this. Then I deleted the message, blocked the number, and put my phone on silent. I refused to let him occupy any more space in my life, electronically or otherwise. My focus now was on reclaiming my home, not just physically, but emotionally. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The first order of business was changing the locks again, this time to a high-tech smart lock with a keypad and camera. Every time my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the front porch, my heart would leap into my throat, but it was always just a package delivery or a neighbor walking their dog. The fear was a lingering echo, but with each passing day, it grew fainter. I threw myself into making the house mine again with a renewed fervor. I spackled over the dozens of nail holes Carol had hammered into my freshly painted walls and gave the living room another coat of calming blue, symbolically erasing the last traces of her presence. I scrubbed floors, deep-cleaned carpets, and hired a landscaper to tame the wild rose bushes in the backyard, transforming the thorny chaos into a beautiful, fragrant garden. Each act of improvement was an act of defiance, a reaffirmation that this was my space, my sanctuary, and no one could take that from me. News about Richard and Carol trickled in through Mr. Davies. The district attorney's office had indeed pressed criminal charges. Carol, given her age and apparent delusion, was offered a plea deal, probation and mandatory psychiatric evaluation, which she accepted. The story that emerged was a sad one. 20 years ago, her husband had lost the house in a bad investment. He'd been too ashamed to tell her, so he'd arranged to rent the house back from the new owners without her knowledge. For 2 decades, she had lived in the house, blissfully unaware that she was a tenant, not an owner. When the Hendersons, who had bought it from the investors years later, decided to sell, Carol's carefully constructed reality had shattered. Richard, however, was not treated so sympathetically. He was her son, her lawyer, and he knew the truth. Instead of getting his mother the help she desperately needed, he chose to indulge her delusion, weaponizing it with his legal knowledge. He committed fraud and perjury, not just to steal a house, but to protect a fragile lie. The state bar suspended his license indefinitely, pending the outcome of the criminal trial. Facing overwhelming evidence, he pled guilty to multiple felonies. His sentencing was 6 months of house arrest and 5 years of probation. He had tried to make me homeless, and now he was the one legally confined to his own home. The irony was not lost on me. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 2 months after the court hearing, I was on my porch, finally assembling the new swing. The air smelled of wood shavings and decaying leaves. I heard a car door shut and looked up to see an older, silver-haired woman walking hesitantly up my sidewalk. It wasn't Carol. It was her sister, Brenda Gable, the disgraced notary. She looked smaller and more tired than I imagined, clutching her purse like a life raft. "Mr. Peterson?" she asked, her voice quiet. I stood up, my hand resting on the back of the swing. "Yes?" I just wanted to apologize," she said, refusing to meet my eyes. What my sister and my nephew did was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But Richard, he can be very persuasive. He said it was just a little white lie to help his mother's peace of mind, that it wouldn't hurt anyone. I never should have listened. I've lost my notary commission, my reputation. I'm so sorry for my part in all of this. She looked up at me then, and I saw not malice, but shame and regret in her watery eyes. She was just another person caught in the web of Richard's toxic manipulations. "I appreciate you coming here to say that," I said, and I meant it. Her apology couldn't undo what happened, but it was a step towards closing that chapter. I hope you can move forward." She nodded, gave me a weak, grateful smile, and walked away. I never saw her, Carol, or Richard again. The house next door went up for sale a month later and was bought by a young family with 2 loud, happy kids whose laughter now filled the space where Carol's silent judgment used to be. Life settled into a peaceful, happy rhythm. I hosted my first Thanksgiving, the house filled with friends, laughter, and the scent of turkey and pumpkin pie, just as I had imagined. Buster snoozed by the fireplace mantel, the one Carol's husband had supposedly built, though the Hendersons later told me it came with the house basking in the warmth and love that filled the room. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, I think about that thick folder of papers. The mortgage, the deed, the proof of ownership. They are more than just documents. They are a testament to a truth worth fighting for. Richard and Carol had tried to steal my house, but in the end, they had given me something far more valuable. They had shown me the strength I never knew I had. They had turned my house into a home, forged not just by paint and wood, but in the crucible of a fight I had refused to lose. And as I sit there, the gentle creak of the swing the only sound, I know with an unshakable certainty that this is where I belong. This house is mine.